Hello, Rank Squad. When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds or Aviator Nation, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand and brilliant marketing, but an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the businesses, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, who are home of the number one checkout on the planet. And the not so secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning that there are way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going. So, if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. It's no secret, businesses that want to grow with Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/ranks, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/ranks to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/ranks.
Hello, this is international football commentator Derek Ray, and you're listening to the Ranks FC podcast.
Hello, Rank Squad, and welcome to Champions League Takeaway here on Ranks FC. Coming at you live straight after Arsenal's 1-0 loss to PSG at the Emirates in the Champions League semi-final first leg. My name is Jack Collins, and I'll be your host today. And joining me across the water, all the way from sunny San Diego, it's Mr. Dean Jones. How you doing, mate?
Hello, mate. Yeah, I'm good. It is sunny in San Diego today, which is nice. I know it's sunny for you too over there, so that's a nice vibe that we've both had, leading us into this Champions League semi-final. Very good. I actually took in another Champions League game before the big one. I watched Al Hilal against Al Ahly, and that was a good undercard, I have to say, for the big European one. It was. I'll be honest. I don't watch a lot of Saudi football, and this is probably the most of a full game I've ever actually watched. It was chaos, really, to be honest, mate. So that was fun, and seeing our old man Mitrovic in action. They lost, but that was a fun game. And it got me really kind of hyped up for this one. I feel in the end it's a game that PSG enjoyed, and it's a game that Arsenal endured. I think that's probably the biggest takeaway I could say that's come away from it.
Yeah, I mean, let's get stuck into it. I suppose there's no point beating around the bush. There's no point hanging about, especially with one game to dissect like this. I mean, going through it, the first 20 minutes, it felt like this could be a very, very painful evening for Arsenal. And it really did feel like one-way traffic. PSG sprang out of the blocks really quick and quietened down what was a pretty raucous Emirates before the game. I don't think that ever kind of came back, really.
No.
Apart from a lot of vociferous boos at halftime for the refereeing team. But, it was one of those kind of strange ones where without Thomas Partey, it was always going to be, how do Arsenal shift things around? What does it look like in terms of the midfield balance? And Mikel Merino dropping back in there and not them playing as the number 9. We were always kind of questioning what was going to go on with, are they going to have an aerial presence up top, or is this going to be swinging crosses in for Gigi Donnarumma to basically just pluck out of the air? And as the game kind of progressed, I felt like Arsenal dug their way into it, not necessarily kind of in the way of being like, oh, they're creating loads and loads of chances, but the game wasn't as stretched as perhaps it had been in those first 20 minutes where PSG looked like they were picking up space all over the pitch. It's a strange one. I think you're probably right in that my biggest takeaway from it is that Arsenal are still alive in a game that they might not have been if this had stayed the way that it started. Equally, I'm sure there is elements of frustration around the fact that Arsenal did find their way into the game, did manage to kind of feel it out, and yet weren't able to hugely kind of put any real pressure on in those last few minutes with the game on the line. And I appreciate it's a 2-legged affair. I appreciate it. They have to go back and play a second leg in Paris, and the second goal might have killed them. But equally, I think the Emirates expected tonight, and they didn't hugely get what they were expecting.
No, obviously, people talk about the Real Madrid game as the best atmosphere that's ever been at the Emirates, and there was a lot of hope that they could recreate that. I know a lot of Arsenal fans that were heading to this game, and they were meeting up very early. It had a cup final feel to it, and so it should. A Champions League semi-final is a huge occasion for Arsenal to be involved in. But you felt like they were kind of in awe of the occasion when the game started, and PSG just played the normal game. I thought they were excellent. Like the technical ability of PSG, particularly in that first 20 minutes, it left me like open mouthed at times, mate. Like the slickness of their passing, the fluidity of their movements, the way that Ousmane Dembélé was just impossible to mark, and Arsenal didn't know who should be tracking him. It really was a case of no Partey, no party, because they missed Thomas Partey so much in there. Mourinho obviously did well across the game, but they did miss Thomas Partey, and I was surprised, to be honest, that Arsenal were able to get to the break only being a goal down. And it was very significant that they were able to do that. Now, they had a bit of luck go their way. There's no doubt about it as far as I'm concerned. I think the foul on Kvaratskhelia from Jurrien Timber is a penalty. I just don't see why Kvaratskhelia would go down. Like, unless that arm across was actually enough to get him down, I don't see why he would go down lightly. They was going to score.
It's quite interesting, actually, hearing the discussions around this, because my immediate reaction was no.
And, mine too, initially.
And I kind of have been thinking about it as well. And also considering the absolute kind of madness that kicked off when they were denied a penalty on Mikel Merino in the stadium from a perfectly good challenge from João Neves, we should probably add,
yes.
Where he nicks the ball away.
Great challenge.
People would have been absolutely squealing for that penalty if it had gone the other way. I think that it was probably for the best, in the, not necessarily in terms of the way that the game went, but in terms of the atmosphere, I think could have taken quite a nasty turn. And we've spent a long time in the last couple of weeks talking on podcasts about referees and treatment of referees, et cetera, right? So I don't really want to go down that route. I think it's all right. I think it's one of those that's probably in the grey enough area that if it had been given on the pitch, I don't think it would have necessarily been overturned. Whereas the fact it wasn't given on the pitch, I think is one of those where you go, okay, fair enough. But I am with you in that I don't really understand why he goes down, but I also equally still think he goes down easily. And maybe there is just a moment in that somewhere in the kind of mixer where we're just in the grey area of what that is.
Maybe. I just think that with VAR and the decisions that we've seen across the experimentation of VAR, that there are almost no occasions when I would expect that to not be given once it's under video review. I'm just extremely surprised that VAR hasn't gone through with that. So, yeah, shocked really.
I still think he goes down too softly. I think if he doesn't, it's one of those ones where he throws his arms into the air and I'm a bit like, you don't go down like that with that kind of contact. I think that there's probably a level to something that is. And
I don't know, man. I'm watching it again now, and like, I don't know if he definitely got the shot away because of the way that Rice is coming over to cover, but he's had 3 Arsenal players on skates the way he's gone through them, right? He's literally gone through the middle of 2 of them, and then Timber's kind of the desperate last act. It's a penalty. It's a penalty. It's not a clothesline because it's not his neck, but it's right around his.
It's a bit of a rugby arm, isn't it?
It's a bit of like, yeah. So
just about pulls it away. I don't know. I'm stuck with you. Now you've put it that way, I can understand. But at the time, I thought he went down too easily, and I'm going to stick with that. I think he does just go down a touch too easy. I think if he tries to run through it and he gets dragged back, then the ref gives it. And instead he goes down at the contact. And maybe that's where that decision is made, as opposed to, Whereas, but we're nitpicking here,
VA
right?
Arsenal, mate. Yeah, I mean, it's got them off the hook.
And that has got them off the hook. They were, however, denied what would have been a one-on-one by Bukayo Saka coming in for when there's a Nuno Mendes coming together at the end of the first half, which is what set everyone off a little bit. And I think that decision's wrong as well. I don't think there's enough contact there between Saka and Nuno Mendes for him to go down. I'm a huge advocate of Nuno Mendes, and that also, of what he's done over the course of this season. To be honest, what he did today as well, incredibly impressive with the way the performance he put in on that left-hand side, but he goes down too easily there. And I think Arsenal were kind of a little bit chafed by that decision. And look, Saka gets booked for his reaction to that. I think, we've watched Bukayo Saka for a long time at this point. That's not really in his nature, to be that frustrated about it. So maybe that's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I know that obviously one of them is a penalty and therefore one of them isn't. So they're slightly different decisions. But if we're going to say that one went that way, I think you can probably point to that one and say he would have been through on goal. Now, whether he would have scored, because actually anyone seeming to shoot across Donnarumma today didn't feel like they were making any headway. But, I think that Arsenal can feel rightly aggrieved at that decision at the same time.
Yeah, and look, from a positive standpoint, like they were on the ropes, right? Like Timber looked like he was on ice skates. He was getting the runaround from Kvara. Very lucky not to get a yellow card just after that penalty incident, and both those decisions going in Arsenal's way would have been a big relief. And then about 10 minutes later, they were able to finally.
Right, the ship.
They were like, okay, let's get into this game. It felt like, they were playing with a hot object. They no one wanted the ball. They were just like, it was get rid of it, like move the ball around. And like, yes, PSG were pressing them fast and high, but the lack of composure was so clear, and how quickly everyone just wanted to get rid of the ball just wasn't natural to me for a team that can be so composed. But it changed towards the back end of the first half because, on 25 minutes, you're thinking that halftime whistle can't come soon enough for Arsenal. And by the time you get to the end of the half, you're thinking, actually, Arsenal don't want to get to halftime. They've got the momentum here.
5 more minutes here.
Yeah, and they could well have scored. So I was quite impressed with the fact that they managed to keep their head through that moment. I was impressed that Arteta managed to... I wouldn't say he kept his head, but the fact he wasn't sent off.
He kept his head. You know what? In an emotional
he whined a lot. He moaned a lot.
I think that's as cool a head performance as you can expect.
This is the thing.
You've asked for everyone to bring their boots, bring the intensity, bring the atmosphere, and then it starts off in the manner that it did pre-game with it being so raucous, and then hitting it back, and seeing your team struggle and then grind themselves back into things. I thought he kept his head in a relatively calm manner for most of it. And that's all you can ask for. You don't want your managers to not have any intensity either, right? Like there are moments, and we've discussed this again across the course of the year, where we think he's strayed too far, either out of his technical area or in the comments that have been made. I don't think that was the case tonight.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair and hard for Arteta because he's extremely passionate, and we know that sometimes his emotions actually not only get the better of him, but are actually to the detriment of his team. And that's the way that I thought it was heading after that early spell. We haven't actually really talked about Ousmane Dembélé's goal yet. It was wonderful, but the amount of space that Dembélé had was astonishing. Like, firstly, to pick up the ball where he did in the first instance, to kind of progress the ball into Kvaratskhelia, but secondly, to kind of find the space again and hang back to be on the edge of the box to steer that home. I can't believe that Arsenal, in that early stage of the game, were not closer to him. Like that, I know that they wouldn't have expected him to play like that.
Absence, right? So I think, well, they should have expected him to play like that because PSG scored a very, very similar goal against Liverpool, where he picks the ball up in that space and drives forward into it and then releases, and they go again and ends up in the back of the net. But actually, one of the things that I thought was interesting here was that I don't think everyone knew quite what was going on in terms of who was marking who. And we've, when we talked about PSG, we've discussed the fact that when they fly forward, And when everyone's going, you know that Dembele is basically free roaming around the pitch at this point. He has that complete freedom that his manager has granted him to play make and to create and to do all of those things. You got Kvara on one wing, you got Desire Doué on the other. I don't think anyone would have been completely sure which side they were going to start on. I think you would have expected Kvara to start on the left, but not 100%. The way that the three of them shimmy around and dovetail is beautiful. But he picks up the ball in the central midfield space, and that is probably where you would expect a Thomas Partey to have been in that number 6 role. Now, I want to talk more about what Declan Rice did and kind of what he did in the second half in kind of terms of what Arsenal might be able to do more of in the second leg. But I think that what happens is Rice gets drawn in by the fact that one, Kvara puts Timber on the back foot with that kind of direct running at him, but two, that this midfield from PSG start to kind of exploit those spaces and get into those areas to the point where you don't want your centre-backs following Ousmane Dembélé into the centre of the park, right? That's not what you want them to do because you can be exposed by the pace of this PSG attack at the same point. I think they get dragged too far over in the first place, but that I think is because Kvara has already put Timber on the back foot with the way that he's dribbling at him so early on, in the fact that Declan Rice gets dragged way too far over and therefore Dembele is given that space on the edge of the box. Now, he's still got a lot of work to do. This is a cracking finish because he has to get it around a couple of players and then in off the post, which is pinpoint, right, to actually hit the back of the net in that situation. Sure. I saw this on Twitter. I think it was Mohamed Butt who was basically talking about it and said, you know, with Dembele in those situations, he's either pinging it into the corner with an accuracy that you wouldn't believe, or he's spooning it over the bar and out of the stadium. And those are the two sides that Ousmane Dembélé has had. And look, it's been 6 games before today across both Liga and the Champions League that he hadn't scored in. So, you know, there is sort of that aspect of it at the same time. I think Arsenal are probably just a little bit perplexed by the kind of pace of that move in the same moment and why Dembélé is so deep early on to actually deal with it. And I think they get better at dealing with it over the course of the game. But I can understand why everyone got dragged out of position a little bit because the speed of thought and the speed of movement in there from those players is absolutely exceptional.
Yeah, no, that's a good summary of where they were at in that moment. So where do we go from there, really? It was all about, to say, getting to half-time if they could. Obviously, we were messaging during the game and you were like, this could be a very short podcast if this carries on at this rate. And I was like, they've just got to get to half-time. If it goes to 2-0, they are dead. And
that was about the 30-minute mark, and it did start to change at that point.
And it did, and they had managed to ride the wave. And PSG were never going to be able to maintain that intensity. But obviously, there's always a strong danger that it does come again, another big wave. And obviously, there's also the problem that when it's the second half, when you do start to assert yourself, you're still scared because you don't want to leave the back door open because they'll murder you. Like, they will take 2-3 seconds, ping, 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 balls in the back of the net. And that's what would have also been at the back of their mind, because that happens, the tie is dead. Now, look, as you look towards this, PSG, they'll score at home. Like, Liverpool didn't allow them to score at home, but PSG, I think every other game this season, have scored at home.
But also, that took one of the most monumental goalkeeping efforts of all time from Alisson. Now, we've seen David Raya have those kind of performances, but that took something exceptionally special from a Liverpool and also an inordinate amount of luck. And we talked about that on the podcast following that game. What I think is interesting is kind of where Arsenal can learn from what they did tonight and where PSG can. Because you said this, and I think you're bang on. There's 2 ways that PSG can kind of do you, right? They're so good that they can suffocate you into that area and not let you out and just literally knock the ball around. So rarely do they swing the ball into the box, right? So it's so rare. It was only really, there was one from Hakimi, which ended up on Marquinhos' head and ended up with Raya saving. It was a relatively comfortable save, but that wasn't comfortable, and that was off the back of a set piece. And then there was a little bit more of it right at the end when Gonzalo Ramos came onto the pitch, right? But they tend not to do that. So if you are defending, you're defending small spaces, you're defending 3 unbelievably brilliant dribblers who are able to go at you. And then they know that Barca can come on and open games up later on. But the way that Desire Doué played tonight was that shades of Neymar in terms of the way he was just taking players on over and over and over again. And do you know what I love about that? At 19 years old, didn't care if he lost the ball. Right, would work back 100%, but didn't care if he lost the ball, willing to try things. Kvara does it constantly, but Kvara is also one of the hardest working wingers in the entire game. And then Dembélé has got this free role where he can just link it up. And he was everywhere, right? Like there were points in the first half where he was dropping into the left back position to pick up the ball. There were points, notably for the goal, obviously, but also later on in the half where he was alongside Vitinha and João Neves at the base of the midfield to be like, okay, where can I orchestrate from here? Now, that's an incredible skill when you're a player who can go either way like Dembélé can, who's able to kind of flip the ball left or right and be equally comfortable on either foot. All of those things are important. But I think that, if there is this kind of sense that the more Arsenal grew into the game, and what I texted you was, Arsenal felt like they were scared to go forward for the first 30 minutes or so because they were so worried that Hakimi was just going to go blasting down that right wing and open this entire game up. And that's the other thing, because if they're not suffocating you in possession, the flip side of that is they'll let you have the ball for a little bit, and then they'll just try and absolutely blitz you in transition. And those two things coming together are what make them such a dangerous team. Yes, they like to keep the ball. They won the possession battle tonight. But mostly, I think when you kind of come to it, it's the fact that even if you feel like you're grabbing a foothold, even if you feel like you're starting to get a hold of the game, there is always that danger that they'll be able to just go one-on-one against your centre-backs or against your full-backs and put you under the cosh. And look, this is probably a good time to shout out Myles Lewis-Skelly, who I thought had an absolutely phenomenal game. Even with the praise that we can lavish upon this PSG attack, when you're looking at what Lewis-Skelly did today, he felt like almost the only Arsenal player, maybe aside from Bukayo Saka, who stepped up into that atmosphere, who was built for this, who, those big games tend to suit. And the way that he played some of the one-on-one duels down his flank against Hakimi and against Desire Doué at times, and even against Dembélé when he drifted over there, I thought he was the one player that I looked at and went, wow, that's quite a special performance from someone of your age in that kind of situation, in that kind of atmosphere, in a team that want to get you one-on-one. Those things shouldn't be underplayed just because Arsenal lost tonight and because a lot of this Arsenal team weren't particularly good.
Yeah, I mean, in the first half in which Arsenal suffered, he shone. I mean, he won every pass, every tackle he came out with on top of. He completed every pass. What was the other stat I saw? I think he had 16 touches, which was a lot for Arsenal players in that first half. So there's probably a strong argument that he actually was their best player, particularly during the first half. I think by the end of it, you look, and I think Declan Rice had done pretty well as well by the end of it, when you look at his overall contribution to the game. But
I'll come on to him.
Yeah, I mean, look, we'll break here, but ultimately, in the first half, there was an obvious divide between these two teams. No, PSG haven't won the Champions League before, but what they have done is played on this stage before. And I know it's not this set of players, but they've kind of been ready for this. And Arsenal, it's been a long time since they were in a Champions League semi-final, and for these group of players to be here in itself feels like a huge achievement. But there was a big difference in how they began to treat it. And yeah, it felt like the 20 years almost that it's been. I think it's been 16 years since they played in a semi-final, Arsenal in the Champions League, and it looked like it because they didn't know how to treat it. And PSG and Luis Enrique treated it perfectly. And yeah, we'll come on to that in the second half. In the second half of the pod, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll take a break there and I'll open it up with a question there on that when we come back. We're here on Ranks FC Champions League Takeaway talking Arsenal's 1-0 loss to PSG at the Emirates in the Champions League semi-final. Stick with us. Hello, Rag Squad. When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds or Aviator Nation, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand and brilliant marketing, but an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the businesses, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, who are home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not so secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning that way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going. So, if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. It's no secret, businesses that want to grow with Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/ranks, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/ranks to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/ranks. Welcome back to Ranks FC and Champions League Takeaway. Jack Collins here alongside Dean Jones. And DJ, I wanted to open up this second half by asking you a question. And it comes from what you said at the end of that first half. We're talking about players being on this stage, etc., etc. And there's been a lot of chat about how young this PSG team are. So there's been also a lot of chat about how they've changed, and the shift in variation from that kind of Galactics team of pure superstars from a brand into a football team. Now, Arsenal have been building something different, right? But it didn't ever feel like they had to change from that element. There were changes made in terms of the personnel coming in terms of what everyone was fighting for. But also, we talk about Mikel Arteta, who played with Luis Enrique at points during his career, someone who looks up to and talks about him as a mentor. This is a Luis Enrique who, was manager of one of the greatest Barcelona teams of all time, who has won the Champions League before in a season almost beyond compare, in a season where Barcelona won La Liga, won the Copa del Rey, won the Champions League, won the UEFA Super Cup, and won the Club World Cup. So that's pretty special within itself. He's obviously had a couple of years at PSG now, kind of changing things in the background and moving them into the truest kind of emblem of what he wants from a football team. This is a man who took a Spain side and were penalty kicks away from making a final, and who also has a depth of experience at this point and in this stage of a competition. Is that the difference that we saw in those two teams in the first 35 minutes?
Yeah, I think it's also probably helped him having so much Premier League competition across this season. He's beaten Man City, he's beaten Liverpool, he's beaten Aston Villa, and now he came into one against Arsenal. And so I think that those experiences prepared him well for the challenges that come with facing a Premier League team. And obviously he's got enough experience anyway to have dealt with a fixture like this, even without having those matches. But he came up with scenarios and situations that he would put in front of Arsenal and wanted to know how they would deal with it. And one of those is Dembélé and the way that he played here. The unpredictability of his positioning forced Arsenal on their own stadium, one of the biggest occasions they've had in my lifetime, to constantly be worrying about them. And a lot of managers would not have done that, wouldn't have the guts to do that in the early stages of a first leg that is away from home. But he's taken the opposite approach, I think, from what a lot of managers would have done. And he's gone on and told him to go and get the early goal. And then the game might play out from there. And if you can get the second,
gone on the
certainly in control.
Right.
Yeah. So huge credit to Luis Enrique. Coming into the, I mean, in terms of like the two managers, it was a fascinating battle even from the start to have, two managers that have come obviously through like Spanish football, to have their tactical minds at war with one another. I was always going to be fascinated by that. And I think Arteta was mastered a little bit in that sense across the first half. But there'll be a certain sense of relief that he's managed to come out of it and he can learn from that and take it into the second leg. Now, going into Paris, Arsenal, look, it's going to be hostile. Like, the second leg's going to be tough in a different way to how the Bernabeu is tough. Like, the Bernabeu is loud and it's raucous and it is intimidating. But Paris feels a little bit more threatening. And I don't mean like they're actually going to like attack you, but like it's quite a scary place to go.
It's a bit more guttural, is the way I would describe it. Like,
it's
it is
raw and real.
Raw edgeness to the park.
With Madrid, there's a tourist aspect to it, right? Like, obviously, like a lot of those fans that are in the Bernabeu are going every week, and they are like wearing their heart on their sleeve. But you're still getting thousands of people at the game that are tourists, and you're not going to.
The Bernabeu is heritage, and it's like football, like one of the kind of great coliseums of football, right? Whereas it just feels a little bit more. I think intimidating is the right word. Like, when you go to the park, it's a different place, and there is a kind of, element of that kind of burning desire to go and actually be respected on the, at this stage of a competition that they are desperate to win. I think that there is kind of a sense in Paris is like of not imposter syndrome. That's the wrong thing. But I think the difference is that at the Bernabeu, Real Madrid are there like, okay, they're obviously desperate to win this competition because they believe that they own it. Whereas there's a real different desperation, I think, coming from Paris. But, if there is a level of kind of maybe an arrogance that came off Real Madrid. And look, we talked about this, around the Copa del Rey final and basically Rudiger saying before the game, we're going to win it, all of that. There's a sense, I think, that when you're discussing these two games in kind of different ways, one, Arsenal obviously had a much bigger lead going, into the game at the Bernabeu, and Arsenal have a pretty dreadful record at turning around second leg ties when they're away from home, and when they're down from the first leg. But I think that what they came up against tonight was a team, not a group of individuals. And it is weird that we're talking about Real Madrid and PSG after what we'd be talking about 5-10 years ago, in those kind of terminologies. But this was a team that were running for each other. Look, if you said to these Arsenal players tomorrow, who would you rather play against, Kylian Mbappe or Ousmane Dembélé? I guarantee you they'd all say Kylian Mbappe. Don't make me do that again. Don't make me chase Ousmane Dembélé around the field. Don't make me move into those spaces. At least with Mbappe, you kind of know what he's trying to do. Now, it's difficult to stop him. I'm not arguing that at all. Still a wonderful footballer. But like the unpredictability of Ousmane Dembélé within this PSG setup, the work rate around him, etc., etc. I think that there is a level to that is kind of a step up from where this Real Madrid team are right now. And we talked about this when we discussed Real Madrid, but like I feel like this PSG side are ready to fight and die for each other in a way that Real Madrid do not feel like they are right now. And that, I think, is a really difficult thing to overcome if you're a side chasing a game away from home in the second leg of a game like this. So that's not to say it's impossible, because I don't think it is. And I think that if Arsenal were to score early, then we would get a real test, a true test of where a very young PSG side are from an emotional and a mental perspective. And this isn't going to be a potential crumble like's happened in the past. That came from almost this same thing we're talking about Real Madrid with, in that it almost felt like people were starting to bicker before it all happened. Whereas this would come from a kind of, we haven't been in this situation particularly, and this is still a relatively new group of players. Do we trust in the system? I think they would. And I think they would go on and kick on again. But I think that's the way you get at it. But I did want to come on to Thomas Partey's absence, but also Declan Rice's performance tonight, because I thought he struggled a bit in the number 6 role. I agree that I think he grew into the game. But you look at the Trossard moment for Arsenal, right, where he gets away in that second half. That comes from Declan Rice driving through the middle of the park, right, for the first time really in the game, and beating a player and allowing himself to slide a pass into Trossard, who gets in behind. We didn't really see any of that from Declan Rice apart from that moment, because he was being asked to do something different as the kind of deepest iron player, as the number 6, without a kind of defensive structure of Partey behind him. And maybe if Jorginho had played, he would have played a different role today. I think there's also probably an argument to say that Mikel Merino will start up front, because it gives Arsenal a bit more of an aerial threat in there, when actually they just sort of slung crosses into the box at times, and there was no one really in there to challenge Donnarumma. I think Merino, as we saw from the disallowed goal, which was ruled offside correctly, that he can be in there and making a nuisance of himself and making those things happen. But I do think that actually the difference that Arsenal will look to really be the key change will be not necessarily just Partey coming back in, but how that frees Declan Rice up to potentially, exploit any opportunities in midfield. Because today I thought that the PSG midfield absolutely suffocated Arsenal in there. And that's why you saw a performance from Martin Ødegaard where there was a lot of people tweeting when he came off saying, I didn't realize that Ødegaard was on the pitch, right? That wasn't a captain's performance. It wasn't a leader's performance. And I think that ultimately he was completely and utterly taken out of the game by the fact that PSG's midfield was so good. And that, I think, is the difference that maybe you can get with moving Declan Rice further up. Can you put those midfielders on the back foot?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Partey owes Arsenal a massive second leg, because to put himself in the situation where he missed this one
was ridiculous.
Was ridiculous, and it's cost him. Now, on the flip side of that, he's also managed to show how important he is to them by missing it, and he'll probably get a new contract. And maybe there are some Arsenal fans out there that underappreciated him. And across the Madrid games, maybe while we were all throwing flowers at Declan Rice, maybe Partey was deserving of a little bit more love. But obviously, the yellow card that he picked up kind of clouded that. And Arsenal missed him massively, particularly in those early stages when Dembélé was getting into those holes. It's not just the physicality, the way that Partey reads the game, but it's having the nous to shout at other people what they should be doing. And Rice is getting better at that, but he's not there yet. He hasn't got the experience of Partey. And he's still got to focus on his own game. He can't be managing everybody else around him. So it was a big absence. I mean, it's a bit strange that while Marino was signed as a midfielder, they actually missed him up front rather than having him in the midfield. But that's kind of where we are. Trossard can't really be playing that role again. So I expect it'll be back to having Marino.
Did fine, but from that left-hand side, and his best moments came when he switched with Martinelli and was able to actually, make a difference from the flank. And so actually there might be a decision there for Mikel Arteta to make in terms of which of them starts from that left-hand flank when it comes to these kind of moments. But I am intrigued by what he does here to try and shake this up, because again, we talk about these different elements to it. And look, we should probably come on to the kind of late chances from a PSG perspective, because Barkla comes on and almost scores the team goal of the tournament with just an absolutely crazy collection of 1-2s before he screws it wide, but he should do better. And then Gonzalo Ramos hits the bar with a kind of toe-poked finish that was incredibly unconventional, but nearly worked, when basically the entire Arsenal backline went for the full Monty moment and all thought they were going to catch him offside and didn't look like he was. And João Neves should probably do better when he screws one over the bar from the edge of the box after some nice work in the area. So the opportunities did start to open up towards the end. You expect that a little bit, because Arsenal were obviously going to try and chase the game a touch, maybe not fanatically, but a touch. But I do think it's going to be one of those question marks, and there will be question marks from Arsenal fans here about Martin Ødegaard, because he's the man wearing the armband. And when Martin Ødegaard's having a bad game, he does the whole G'ing up the crowd. You can tell when he's having a bad game because he G's up the crowd more. He turns to the crowd a whole lot more and does the whole arms to the crowd thing. And it's kind of like, give them something to shout about, Martin. Get the ball in those areas. And honestly, I think that there is probably a question mark for Mikel Arteta to try and deal with that. Now, maybe he will point to it and say, with Declan Rice being more destructive force a bit further forward, Martin Ødegaard is freed up to do different elements of the game, and then be more space for him to exploit. And that's probably fair. But I also do think that, in these games, you want your captain to step up. And I thought he was, noticeably absent tonight.
Yeah, definitely. He's got to have more threat on the game and also more control on the game. So he'll be disappointed with that too. I think that, as I said at the start of the pod, you just come out of it thinking how much you enjoyed watching PSG tonight, how much they entertained as well as controlled periods of that game. And I come away from it from an Arsenal perspective, just feeling like the whole thing was flat. From the tifo that they launched of just a cannon. it was a disappointing team. And I know that Arsenal fans group, I think it's Ashburton Army, I know that they had like raised money and they'd like put forward designs that they wanted, and it was much more like of a European vibe, and they wanted to make fun of like, I think they had ideas of like knocking Real Madrid off a chessboard, and PSG was standing there too, and they were like, they wanted to kind of recreate all of that stuff and have a more kind of aggressive approach to it. And I know that was knocked back, and Arsenal said, don't worry, we've got tifo plans of our own, and they just unveiled that cannon, and it's like, it's fine, but it's just like a flag.
It was very FIFA 14 graphics.
Yes.
That's what it felt like.
And it's
correct. Like I'm never gonna slag off a club too much for trying to create things and visuals.
Which is kind of pointless because
it just felt
pointless.
Like a strange thing.
There
was a lot made of it as well. I was like, oh, there's going to be a pitch side display for the first time for the Arsenal fans, and then you see, obviously, we've seen some unbelievable tifos from PSG, over the years, and you're kind of like, oh, that's your response to it.
It's supposed to evoke passion, right? And you're supposed to feel it. You see that, and you're like, oh, I saw it in the club shop earlier. It was like $5.99. Like it just didn't do anything for me. So that was a bit flat. The performance was flat. In turn, the atmosphere turned flat, and you just came away a bit meh. I mean, Arsenal fans would have looked forward to this all day. Like, I'm sure fans were in pubs early. I'm sure that families were meeting up around someone's house.
I saw a great tweet from Miguel Delaney basically saying it feels like a massive day. It feels like a day with a massive game on it. Like the amount of shirts around in North London, the amount of people milling about at like 4:00 is like absurd because they're like, I don't know what else to go. I don't know what to do with this nervous energy. And I thought North London Forever sounded amazing. And then suddenly there was just that sort of emblem on the side, and I was like, oh, right. And you know what? The Arsenal fans responded to the PSG goal really well. Like the first sounds were like, oh, okay, cool.
You actually felt a groan when they scored. Before the cheers of PSG, you actually heard the groan of the Arsenal fans. Like, surely not. He can't be offside because he's hit it from the edge of the box, but surely this hasn't just happened. And you see the fans going wild. But then, a few seconds later, you're like, come on. Like, it's early. You've got 87 minutes to come back or whatever. So that was the right reaction. But then, obviously, they had to sit through another 20 minutes of just getting battered, of wave after wave of PSG attacks, and the possession was relentless.
That deserves credit in its own right? And this probably is something we should talk about. Like, how often do we sit here when we're previewing a game, we're talking about a game, and be like, the crowd are going to be so up for it, you have to shut them up. And an early goal doesn't always do that. It does with some teams, especially if a team's in a bad place. You can shut up a fan base by scoring no goal. People are just like, but that wasn't never going to work tonight. What quietened the Emirates was watching their team for 20 minutes not be able to get the ball.
Yeah.
Right, and not be able to do anything with it when they got the ball. And I think that when you're kind of putting those things together, it's a masterclass from a PSG perspective in actually coming in and like lowering the emotional tone of the atmosphere to the point where in the second half it felt flat, as you say. So but that is something that PSG deserve credit for, not something that I'm going to sit here and criticize Arsenal for, because when you watch your team being bossed for 25 minutes, like, it's just a sickener, especially when it's a game that you're so up for, right? Like, it's hard.
It's the sort of game, when you're Fulham, for example, and you play Arsenal, that's what they do to Fulham. And you're like, as the Fulham fan, you're just like, oh, I just hoped I would see more than this. I didn't want this to be the way it goes. It did feel a bit English, to be honest. Like the way that Arsenal played, they were looking at set pieces. Obviously, they did score from a set piece that got ruled out, and but they were kind of hanging on for moments, and it all felt a bit old school at times. And PSG just played without fear, and it did feel like kind of how England has felt in the past when you get to a massive game and the opponents are just in a better frame of mind to deal with it.
This is a really, really good analogy. Like, I completely understand. Do you know what this felt like? Felt like England against Spain.
Yeah, it did
In
feel
the
like England
Euros
against
final.
Spain. It completely did. The way that Spain just didn't let England get into that game, it felt exactly like that. And it happens a lot for English teams in Europe anyway. But again, it's just a lack of belief in yourself, I think, and it's a lack of experience of winning these sorts of matches. And I'll be totally honest, I kind of want PSG in the final because of the way that they're going to play in that final. I want a PSG Barcelona final because that is going to be mesmerising. Those two teams are going there to play football. And that's what I want to see at this point. Like, I'm sorry, Arsenal fans. I'm sorry, Inter fans. As a neutral,
I think that's fair.
That's kind of what you want to see now.
Ridiculous.
Doesn't mean it'll happen. Like, Arsenal have got an opportunity to make sure that doesn't happen because they're only a goal down. But from a footballing standpoint, you watch a game like that and you're like, well, sorry, but I want PSG through because they've played the game so well. Whereas Arsenal have managed to stay in the game. But let's see what happens because they've now got to go away. They've got to kind of analyse.
They're going to have to come out of the shell a little bit in the second half, in the second leg, right? Because not only
I don't know if they'll be brave enough, but they'll be terrified of going 2-0 down.
Yeah.
That's the difficult thing. They've got to be brave. They've got to be as brave as PSG were tonight. The difference is PSG, it didn't feel out of character for them to come and play like that. Whereas I think for Arsenal, even though they have done it plenty of times on the road this season, to go and do it in a Champions League semi-final and set the tone, probably a bit nerve-wracking.
From a kind of a slightly different perspective, I did look at the two benches and went, ooh, I don't like that bench from an Arsenal perspective at all. Now, obviously, the injury list is pretty extensive at this point, and obviously, all of the players that are missing are not all game changers. But it's just having that experience on the bench as much as anything, and players that that you can trust at the same time. Look, Arsenal's woes from an attacking perspective in terms of injuries are not all injury related, right? Like what I'm trying to say here, I think, is that the squad wasn't deep enough to begin with, and then they got injured, right? Like, so that's kind of where I've been at with it for a little while. Now, you can't do anything about the injuries, right? They happen to every club. They happen to every club at a different level each season, but you have to just try your best to get by. But if your squad isn't deep enough to begin with, then you're in trouble. And whilst everyone can be like, oh yeah, we'd all miss, our key players. Of course you would. And, it's unfortunate that Arsenal are missing key players at this point in the season. And this PSG side are looking at pretty much full strength. From an Arsenal perspective, of course, that's frustrating. But also, you've got to have those pieces in place to have a squad that's worth doing with in front of it. In all of this madness, it's easy to forget that start of the season at times, they were like, even with Kai Havertz, we need to sign a number 9. Even with Gabriel Jesus, we need to sign a number 9. And then both of them get injured. And it's like, well, we've needed a number 9 like we've never had before. And it kind of goes to kind of change the show. But like, if you start a season like that and then you don't upgrade it in January, then you're asking for trouble in those regards. Yeah. And when I was looking at that bench and thinking, who could come on and change this? Is Raheem Sterling going to be that guy? No. The only player you look at on that bench and go, well, Nwaneri could come on and maybe he'll do some things. But that is putting a lot of faith in a youngster to make a difference on the biggest stage, and that's risky.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that Arsenal didn't make a sub until 83 minutes and it was Ben White for Jurriën Timber tells you that there wasn't the depth there to go and change this game. And that is something that they need to work on in the summer transfer market, making sure that their squad is deeper than this if they're going to get to a stage where they can challenge all of the elite. PSG's subs are Bradley Barcola, Gonzalo Ramos, and Warren Zaire-Emery. They're the 3 players that they bring on. Like, they could all have probably started for Arsenal or PSG. Like, they're that good. And Arsenal's 2 subs they bring on are Ben White and Ethan Nwaneri comes on in the last minute. That's a golfing class when it comes to squad depth. And even if you look at the injured players, mate, I mean, Calafiori, Gabriel Jesus, Kai Havertz, Jorginho, Partey suspended. Yeah, all good players, but I'm not sure. Maybe Jesus would have made the biggest difference out of those. Kai Havertz, possibly, depends what sort of game you get out of him. But yeah, when you looked at the benches, you're right. PSG had it in the locker to go and do that. And
maybe the easiest way to describe the difference here is PSG left Kangin Lee on the bench. Like, what would Arsenal have given to have a Kangin Lee to bring on?
That's the thing.
Across the forward line.
Well, they should have had like Trossard to bring off the bench. That's what you want. Like you don't want Trossard starting this game. You want him coming off the bench for the last 20 minutes because I know he hates being a sub, but he's great as a sub, especially in a game like this when it's only a goal and he wants to prove himself. And yeah, that was definitely a kind of an underlying narrative of this game that probably won't get too many column inches as people read about it today and tomorrow. But look, Arsenal are still in the tie. They're still in the tie. There's plenty to play for. It's
going to take something very, very brave.
It's going to take something brave, yeah. And it's just whether they sit in and try and get to half-time at 0-0 and then go for finding that goal, or if they're brave enough to come out. And I think a lot of that will come down to the players that are available to Arteta by the time we get there.
I just want to finish with a minute on João Neves because this was a ridiculous performance again from the little dynamo in the minute. And he just... There was a moment in the first half where he won a header against Declan Rice, and I was like, what is going on? Like, he is unbelievable. Now, I found out in recent days that his name translates as Jon Snow. And for any of my Song of Ice and Fire heads out there, he's the prince that was promised, right? Like, he is the child of ice and fire. The cool head to be able to nick those two balls away in the box. He did it twice. I think it was one on Marino, one potentially on Saka, where he makes these unbelievable last-ditch challenges. And then the racing around and just being this like absolute red-hot dynamo in the middle to put everyone under pressure all the time. His physicality for someone so small and his ability on the ball, all of it put together tonight. He's a cheat code. And when you look at some of the business, the fact that he was, basically allowed to go for around £50 million, $60 million when there were people spending that kind of money elsewhere on a variety of different players. He is a very, very, very special footballer. And I thought he was absolutely magnificent in the heart of that midfield today.
Yeah, I mean, I think the term generational talent gets thrown around a lot these days, but João Neves he's just like different. He's just built different. Obviously, like there are comparisons to Verratti, and I think he's kind of like a PG version of Verratti, if you like. Like he's a family friendly version because
looks like a choir boy, runs like a demon.
Yeah, exactly, and he hasn't got that underlying perhaps anger and resentment of life. I don't know that Verratti seems to have sometimes. But it's fine because he has got the fire in his belly, so he's not passive. Must be horrible to play against him.
Well, this is it. It must be an absolute nightmare having him chasing you around the midfield for 90 minutes. Like, imagine what that's like. It's like having like the Duracell bunny chasing you about.
Yeah.
It's just incredible. And then the Duracell bunny stops, put a foot on it and goes, oh, I can pick a pass better than almost anyone on this pitch, apart from my midfield partner, Vitinha. So I'll just give it to him if there's any issues. So it's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, they could have had Ugarte in there, right? Ugarte was the man that you thought was going to end up here.
Well, Ugarte's a wonderful player, like a really, really good footballer. But PSG went, okay, move him on because I think we've got something better coming in. That's how a well-run club works. So when well-run clubs operate, they take those opportunities when they come. That isn't to talk down about Ugarte, who I think is excellent and will be a key piece for Manchester United moving forward. But PSG saw the market opportunity, went, all right, we could sell him for 50 million and bring in João Neves. And then we got ourselves covered for maybe the next 10 years as well as everything else. Like, that's how smart clubs operate. And PSG have become a very, very smart club in the transfer market. It's not to say they haven't spent money. They have. They've spent an incredible amount of money. But it's really starting to show in terms of their recruitment, the profiles they've put together. Head coach Harry Brooks tweeted about this, about picking players for roles and responsibilities, not just, oh, they're a good footballer, let's bring them in.
Yeah.
And PSG have done a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful job of that.
Yeah. I mean, he's just like so good to watch on the ball, and I look forward to seeing him in the second leg. It's going to be a huge occasion. Arsenal fans have to head there and hope. PSG have a lot at stake themselves here. They've never won the Champions League. They've got an advantage. They've got 1 foot in the final. And they will believe at this point that they should be favourites to go and win the competition. Like, they have an outstanding structure in place. They know how they're going to play. They know that on their day they are capable of being the best team out of these 4 that are left. And they have an opportunity to show us what a Farmers League can really do, and that they can go and win the Champions League.
I was waiting for something. I knew that something.
Well, they're not. This is the thing, people, obviously, like, I've joined in the fun throughout the years on ranks and stuff of calling it a Farmers League. And it was easy to do that when they had Neymar and Mbappe and Messi running rings around people that are clearly not at the same level as those. It did feel like a Farmers League.
And then collapsing when it comes to actual genuinely elite competition. But
here you have a rebuilt PSG who are a completely different model. And I like them. I like this PSG. I've again made fun of PSG on this podcast and talked about how there was never in a million years I'd let my kids run around in a Paris shirt. Now I'm kind of tempted to go and get them one. That's how times have changed.
You're going to have Vitinha and João Neves on the back of the boys' shirts before too long. That's Christmas next year, all wrapped up. Right, on that bombshell, I think we're going to call this a day and say that we will be back tomorrow to talk all things Inter Barcelona here on Champions League Takeaway. But for now, all's left for me to do is say thank you very much to Dean Jones.
Cheers, mate.
I've been Jack Collins. This has been Champions League Takeaway on Ranks FC. Thank you all so much for listening as ever, and we'll be back with you very, very shortly. Take it easy, gang. Peace. Hello, Rank Squad. When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds or Aviator Nation, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand and brilliant marketing, but an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the businesses, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, who are home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning that there are way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going... So, if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. It's no secret, businesses that want to grow with Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/ranks, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/ranks to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/ranks.